My name is Noah Carter. For almost 2 years, I did everything I could not to think about that camping trip. But last week, I received an email from an old friend I hadn't spoken to since the day it happened. And after seeing the photo attached to that email, I realized I needed to tell this story. Everything started in the summer of 2024. My friends Ethan, Mark, Lucas, and I decided to spend 4 days camping deep in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana. The four of us had been friends since college. This wasn't our first trip together. We'd gone hiking, fishing, and spent nights in the wilderness more times than I could count. None of us were inexperienced outdoors. The first 2 days were completely normal. We set up camp beside a small lake surrounded by pine forest. We spent the days fishing. The nights were for beer, campfires, and stupid conversations. No cell service, no other campers, just the four of us. On the second night, Ethan told us something strange. He said that just before dawn, he heard someone call his name from somewhere in the woods. Not shouting, not echoing, just a normal voice, like someone standing between the trees saying, "Ethan," once, then silence. We laughed at him. Mark immediately said, "You were dreaming, dude." Honestly, I thought the same thing. But when I looked at Ethan, he wasn't laughing. He looked genuinely disturbed. The third night started like any other. We had dinner, hung out around the fire, talked for a while. Around 11, everyone headed to bed. I had my own tent. Mark and Lucas shared one. Ethan slept in the third. The last time I checked my watch, it was around 11:47 p.m. After that, I fell asleep hard. The next thing I remember, I was standing in the woods. I opened my eyes. It was still dark. The campsite was gone. The lake was gone. The tents are gone. I was standing alone among the trees. Freezing cold. My mind completely blank. I looked down at my watch. 3:18 a.m. I had no idea what was happening. I couldn't remember leaving my tent. I couldn't remember walking. I couldn't remember how far I'd gone, or why I was there. The first thing I noticed was my hands. Both of them were covered in mud. My fingernails were packed with dirt, like I'd been digging. My heart immediately started racing. I turned in a circle, scanning the darkness around me. Nothing, just trees, pitch black forest, complete silence. Then I saw a flashlight, far ahead in the distance. I started running toward it. It took nearly 10 minutes before I found a campsite again. The other three were standing outside the tents. Lucas was holding a flashlight. Mark had an axe in his hand, and all three of them were staring at me like I was a stranger. I still remember the look on Ethan's face. It wasn't concern. It wasn't anger. It was fear. I asked, "What the hell is going on?" Nobody answered right away. Finally, Mark spoke. "Where did you go?" "I don't know. I don't remember." The three of them exchanged looks. Then Ethan asked, "You seriously don't remember?" I shook my head. Ethan swallowed hard. Then he said something that sent a chill straight down my spine. "You stood outside my tent for almost an hour." I froze. "No, I didn't. I was never near your tent." Ethan stared directly at me. "You were. You just stood there, not saying a word, just staring into my tent." A wave of nausea hit me instantly, because I knew I wasn't lying. I genuinely couldn't remember any of it. But the worst part was, none of them believed me. The next morning, nobody brought it up. At least not directly. But the atmosphere had completely changed. Lucas still talked to me. Mark tried to act normal. But Ethan, he could barely look at me. I kept trying to explain. I told them maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I had wandered off in my sleep. Maybe I was just exhausted. But honestly, I didn't believe any of those explanations myself, because I'd never sleepwalked a single day in my life. Around noon, we decided to pack up and leave earlier than planned. Officially, it was because of the weather, but everybody knew that wasn't the real reason. On the hike back to the parking area, Ethan stayed at the very back of the group, at least 20 yards behind me. Every time I stopped to wait for him, he stopped too, always keeping the same distance, like he didn't want me anywhere near him. That night, we made it back to town. I honestly thought that was the end of it, but it was only the beginning. 3 days later, Mark called me. The moment I answered, I could tell something was wrong. His voice sounded off. On the last day in the woods. "Did you bring a GoPro?" "No." I didn't even pack one. There was a long silence. Then he said, "I think you need to see this." That night, he sent me a video file. The footage came from a GoPro mounted on Ethan's tent. The timestamp read, 2:41 a.m. I hit play. At first, there was nothing unusual. Just a dark campsite, the tents, the dead campfire, the trees beyond the edge of the clearing. Then about a minute into the footage, I appeared, walking out of the woods. Slowly, steadily. No flashlight, no yaki, no juice. I walked straight past the fire pit, stopped in front of Ethan's tent, and just stood there, exactly like Ethan had described. Not moving, not speaking, not knocking, not looking around, just standing there, watching, for almost 40 minutes. By that point, the back of my neck had gone numb. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part happened at minute 42. I turned around and started walking back into the forest. But right behind me, something moved. I couldn't make out its shape, couldn't make out a face. It was just a dark figure, far too tall to be normal. It appeared the moment I turned away, as if it had been standing there the entire time, waiting, watching. The figure followed me into the trees and disappeared into the darkness with me. Mark replayed the footage dozens of times. The figure wasn't a camera glitch. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't an animal. It appeared at the exact moment I left the frame and vanished with me into the forest. I called Ethan immediately. He didn't answer. I texted him. Nothing. The next day, he blocked my number. I didn't see Ethan again for almost 2 years. Neither did Mark. The only thing Lucas ever said about it was, "Ethan thinks something came back from those woods with you." I laughed. At least I tried to. But honestly, that sentence never left my head. Over the next few months, strange things started happening. I would wake up in places I didn't remember going to. The garage, the backyard, the laundry room. One time, I woke up sitting in my car. The engine was running, and I had no memory of getting there. Doctors told me it could be stress, maybe some kind of sleep disorder. I tried to believe them. I really did. Until last week, I got an email from Ethan. The first contact I'd had from him in nearly 2 years. There was no subject line, no message, just a single photo attached. I opened it. It was a picture from our final night at the campsite. Mark or Lucas must have taken it with a camera, and somehow Ethan had kept a copy. The photo showed the campsite, the campfire, 3 tents, and the 4 of us. Me, Ethan, Mark, Lucas. But then I zoomed in and realized something. There weren't 4 people in that picture. There were 5. The 5th person was inside my tent. You could see the silhouette through the thin fabric, illuminated by the glow of the campfire. A figure was lying inside, clearly visible, and when that photo was taken, I was standing outside by the fire with the other 3. I stared at the image for almost an hour, trying to explain it away, trying to convince myself it was a shadow, a sleeping bag, a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. So I emailed Ethan back. Just one sentence. "Who was the person in my tent?" He replied about 10 minutes later. It was the last message I ever received from him. "I don't know, but that's why I could never be around you again." Then there was one more line. Shorter, far worse. A sentence that's kept me awake every night since I read it. I think it still believes it's you. Hashtag story number 2. I don't remember taking those photos. My name is Connor Hayes. If this hadn't happened to me personally, I'd probably think the person telling the story was making it up. I kept those photos buried on a hard drive for almost a year before I finally found the courage to look at them again. This happened during the summer of 2023. My 2 best friends, Dylan and Trevor, and I went camping in the mountains of northern Colorado. We'd known each other since high school. Trevor was the planner. Dylan was the complete opposite. And I was always the guy carrying a camera on every trip. I love photography. Nothing professional, just a hobby. For that trip, I brought an old Sony camera and a small tripod. The first day was completely normal. We drove for nearly 6 hours, stopped at a few gas stations, listened to music, joked around, argued about who had to pitch the tents first. It's the kind of memory you still remember years later because it was so ordinary. That first night, we built a campfire beside a small lake. Trevor talked about work. Dylan spent most of the night complaining about the lack of cell service. Around midnight, all three of us went to bed. I clearly remember putting my camera inside my backpack, turning it off, zipping the bag shut, then falling asleep. The next morning was completely normal. We hiked, fished, took photos. Nothing unusual happened. Nothing worth remembering. Until the second night. Around 10 o'clock, Dylan asked a strange question. Did either of you leave your tent last night? I shook my head. Trevor did too. Dylan stared at us for a few seconds before laughing. Guess I was dreaming. I asked him what happened. He said that just before sunrise, he heard someone walking around the campsite. But unlike a typical creepy campfire story, that wasn't what bothered him. What unsettled him was that whoever it was seemed to know exactly where every tent was. Like they'd already been there before. We didn't think much of it. In fact, we joked about it over dinner. Then came the third night. I remember very clearly that I went to sleep around 11:20 p.m. That was the last time I checked the time. After that, nothing. No dreams. No memories. No sounds. Nothing at all. I opened my eyes after sunrise. My head felt like it had been split open with a hammer. Trevor was sitting beside the dead campfire. Dylan stood a few yards away. Both of them were staring at me strangely. I asked, "What's going on?" Neither of them answered right away. Finally, Trevor spoke. "Where did you go last night?" I laughed. "What do you mean?" Nobody laughed back. Dylan answered instead. "You disappeared for almost 3 hours." The smile instantly vanished from my face. I thought they were messing with me, but their expressions said otherwise. Trevor continued. "I got up around 2 in the morning to take a leak. Your tent was empty. I felt my stomach tighten. I never left." Dylan looked directly at me. "That's the problem." Then he handed me his phone. There was a photo on the screen. The timestamp read 2:57 a.m. In the picture, I was standing at the edge of the lake, alone, staring out across the water. And I had absolutely no memory of that moment. I kept trying to come up with an explanation. Sleep deprivation, sleepwalking, exhaustion, anything that made sense. But the more I thought about it, the less any of it fit. I'd never had a history of sleepwalking, not once. What made it even stranger was this. Trevor hadn't taken that photo. Neither had Dylan. Both of them swore to me that they didn't. Trevor said he noticed I wasn't in my tent. He woke Dylan up. The two of them went looking for me. When they reached the edge of the lake, they found me standing there, completely motionless, staring at the water. Trevor called my name several times. I didn't respond. It was like I couldn't hear him. Dylan decided to snap a picture because he figured it would be funny to tease me about it later. But the moment he pulled out his phone, it died. 0% battery. Shut off instantly. No photo. No evidence. That's when all three of us fell silent. Because the photo was sitting inside my camera. The same camera I clearly remembered putting in my backpack. Powered off. Zipped away. The night before. I got home and checked the original files myself. The metadata showed that the photo had been taken with my camera at exactly 2:57 a.m. There weren't just 1 or 2 pictures. There were 17. 17 photos. Taken one after another. Same location. Same time frame. And I had absolutely no memory of taking any of them. 17 photographs. I started going through them one by one. The first image showed the lake. The second showed the tree line. The third was pointed toward the night sky. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But then I reached the 8th photo, and I felt my entire body go cold. The picture still showed the lake. But near the edge of the frame, there was someone standing there. Not me, not Trevor, not Dylan. A man, far away, almost blending into the darkness. I zoomed in. I couldn't make out his face, but I could tell he was looking in my direction, or at something standing beside me. What really bothered me was the next photo. In image number 9, the man was closer. In image number 10, closer still, like someone was slowly walking toward the camera while it continued taking pictures. And yet I had no memory of any of it. By that point, Trevor wanted to end the trip immediately. Dylan agreed without hesitation. We packed everything up. loaded the truck, and left the area before noon. The drive home was almost completely silent. Nobody talked much, not until we stopped at a gas station for food. Trevor looked over at me and said, "Connor, do you remember saying anything that night?" I shook my head. Trevor was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "You kept repeating the same sentence." I asked, "What sentence?" He stared out the passenger side window for a moment, then finally answered, "Don't let it know we can see it." I tried to forget that camping trip, and for a while, I almost succeeded. Life went back to normal. Work, friends, family. Nothing strange happened after that, at least not for a while. Then, about 8 months later, I was cleaning out an old hard drive, and I came across the folder from that trip. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe I thought enough time had passed. Maybe I thought I was finally over it. I went through all 17 photos again, and that's when I noticed something I had somehow missed before. In every photo from number 8 through number 17, the man was there, every single time, but he wasn't standing in the same place. Sometimes he was at the edge of the trees, sometimes near the shoreline, sometimes partially hidden behind a trunk. And with every photo, he was closer than he had been in the one before. I zoomed in on the last image, photo number 17. My heart nearly stopped. The man wasn't standing by the lake anymore. He wasn't off in the distance. He was standing directly behind me, less than 3 feet away. I looked closer, and that's when I found the detail that kept me awake for weeks. The man wasn't looking at me. He was staring directly into the camera, as if he knew exactly where it was, as if he knew someone would eventually come back and look through those photos. I sent the image to Dylan. He replied about an hour later. Just one sentence. "Don't send that to Trevor." I asked why. Dylan called me immediately. It was the first time I'd ever heard genuine fear in his voice. He said, "Trevor's moved 3 times since that trip. He doesn't keep a single mirror in his house anymore." I asked him why. There was a long silence. Then he finally said, "Because Trevor swears. Every once in a while, he still sees the man from the photos standing behind you." I laughed, or at least I tried to, until Dylan said one last thing. "There's something I never told you. That night, we didn't find you." I froze. "What do you mean? You guys said..." "No." Dylan cut me off. "Around 3:20, we saw you walk out of the woods on your own. We never went down to the lake." I felt the blood drain from my face. Because if that was true, then none of us had ever been standing at the lake taking those photos. Which meant one thing: who was holding my camera, and who took all 17 pictures that night. Story number 3. My friend swears I was talking to someone who didn't exist. My name is Brandon Cole. If there's one thing in my life I wish I had never gone back and looked at, it's that audio recording. Everything started in the fall of 2022. My friends Aaron, Chris, and I decided to spend 3 days camping near the Appalachian Mountains. It wasn't some hardcore survival trip. It wasn't even particularly remote. Just a well-known hiking area where we could get away from our phones and jobs for a few days. Aaron was the responsible one. He planned everything, always packed more gear than necessary. Chris was the exact opposite. Easygoing, funny, and constantly forgetting something important. I was somewhere in the middle. The trip started completely normally. The weather was perfect on the first day. We set up camp on a flat overlook facing a wide valley. That night we built a fire, roasted hot dogs, drank a few beers, talked about things that didn't really matter. The kind of small details that, looking back, I remember with disturbing clarity. The sound of a beer can popping open, the smell of wood smoke, Aaron complaining because Chris forgot to pack a lighter. Ordinary things. The first night, nothing happened. The second day was just as normal. We hiked nearly 8 miles. By evening, everyone was exhausted. Around 11 o'clock, we turned in for the night. I remember sleeping deeply. But the next morning, while we were eating breakfast, Aaron asked a question that caught me off guard. "Who were you talking to last night?" I thought he was joking. I was asleep by 11. Aaron stared at me for a few seconds. "I heard you talking outside your tent." I laughed. "Probably Chris." Chris immediately shook his head. "Wasn't me. Aaron didn't argue. He just shrugged and changed the subject. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. Because he didn't seem like he was joking. The second night passed normally enough. We stayed around the fire later than before. It was almost midnight when we finally went to our tents. I woke up around 6 the next morning. Aaron was already awake, making coffee, but something felt different. He barely looked at me. Throughout breakfast, he hardly spoke. When Chris walked off to refill water from a nearby creek, Aaron finally turned to me. "You seriously don't remember any of it?" A knot formed in my stomach. "Remember what?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I heard it again last night." The uneasy feeling got worse. Aaron told me he woke up around 3 in the morning. He saw me sitting about 30 yards away from camp, alone, talking to someone. I asked, "Talking to who?" Aaron slowly shook his head. "That's the problem. I didn't see anyone else there." I laughed, but this time it didn't sound natural. Because Aaron wasn't the kind of person who made things up. And what bothered me most was that he looked genuinely worried. That night was our final night in the woods. Nobody brought the story up again, but I noticed Aaron watching me constantly. Every time I looked in his direction, he'd glance away. For the first time during the trip, I felt like something was wrong. And I had no idea that night was when everything would truly begin. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up. I don't know why. There was no noise. No nightmare. I simply opened my eyes. Everything outside was strangely quiet. I checked the time. 2:07 a.m. I was about to roll over and go back to sleep. Then I noticed a faint glow outside my tent. Not a flashlight. Not the campfire. The light from a phone screen. I stepped outside. No one was there. The campsite was completely empty. Aaron and Chris were still asleep. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. But when I climbed back into my tent, I realized my phone wasn't in my sleeping bag. I searched everywhere. Nothing. The next morning, while we were packing up, Chris called out to me. "Hey, is this your phone?" My phone was lying nearly 200 yards away from camp, at the base of a tree. The battery was down to 11%. The strange part was that the voice recorder app was open, and there was a new file. Length, 47 minutes. I had no memory of recording anything. The three of us sat in the truck and played it back. At first, there was nothing but wind, rustling leaves, footsteps. Then, around the 3-minute mark, my voice appeared. I was talking, calmly, naturally, like I was having a conversation with someone. I heard myself ask, "How long have you been out here?" Silence. Then I spoke again. "So why don't you go back?" Silence. A little later, "I don't think they can see you." A cold feeling spread through my hands. Because throughout the entire recording, only my voice could be heard. No second voice. No replays. Nothing. And yet the way I spoke sounded exactly like someone was answering me. Aaron stopped the recording. No one said a word. Finally, Chris looked at me. "Brandon, do you remember any of that?" I shook my head. Not a single second. The part that bothered me most was one small detail. At the 41-minute mark, I heard myself laugh. Then I said, "I think you're standing too close." And right after that, the recording ended abruptly. After that trip, Aaron changed. Not in an obvious way, but enough for me to notice. He texted less, called less. The occasional hangouts slowly disappeared. About 2 months later, Aaron moved to another state. No warning, just a short message. "I need a change of scenery." I assumed he was dealing with personal problems. Until almost a year later, one evening, I got an email from him. The subject line contained only one sentence. I finally found it. There was a file attached. A photograph of an old local newspaper article. The article was from 1987. It described the disappearance of a man in the exact same trail area where we had camped. His name was Walter Finch. According to the report, the last people to see Walter said he often wandered through the woods alone at night. That part didn't catch my attention. What made my blood run cold was the final paragraph. A friend of Walter's told investigators that, in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Walter had repeatedly spoken to an elderly man that nobody else could see. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I scrolled to the bottom of Aaron's email. He had written only one more sentence. "I don't think you were the only one talking to him that night." I never replied, and I never told anyone. Until about 3 weeks ago, I bought a new phone. While transferring my data, I came across that recording again. I opened it out of pure curiosity, put on my headphones, turned the volume all the way up, and listened from the beginning. For the first time, I heard something none of us had noticed before. At the 12-minute mark, right after I asked, "How long have you been out here?" there's a sound, very faint, almost impossible to hear, like someone whispering. I had to replay it over and over before I was sure. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't static. It was a man's voice. Old, raspy, and incredibly weak. He says only 3 words. "I'm still here." I've never played that recording again.